we've been getting questions, quite a few questions from social media, and I'll read some of those questions to you. But first, I'd like to ask a question of each of you. How do you think your presentation, the lessons that you drew from your case studies, how do you think those might apply to the case of Albania? I mean, Yoni lives here, and our two international guests, I know they've spent a few days in Tirana already. So give us your thoughts, give us your views. We'd love to hear.
Okay, thank you, Dorina. You know, I've been for a couple of years studying what I talked about today. And because of this, every time I visit a new city, I have that in the back of my mind. I'm sure that all of you go through the same experience.
It's a professional illness, yes.
Yeah. And I think actually my point of view on this is that it seems to me that Tirana has dealt with the situation in a quite a good way. So it's very interesting to walk from the city center towards the outskirts of the city. Let's say I couldn't walk that much, but as much as I could do, I could realize that there's a lot of investment in the city center where everyone is able to have that space for themselves, and that's usually the place where everyone crosses when they're moving from one side to the other. And as you move to the outskirts, you realize that it's more difficult to make the infrastructure and the facilities and the green spaces and everything that comes along with this as good. And I mean, it's normal. I believe that this happens in every city. But it seems to me that it's becoming better and better.
So it sounds like the lesson there is to spread investment outside of the city center, not to focus all development, all urban beautification programs in the center, but try and reach the far out suburbs, yeah? So perhaps the lesson from Vienna, what we heard from Vienna's former deputy mayor, the approach by 1,000 needles, right? That might be the solution there. And Yoni?
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, I agree in terms of public projects, that's the urban acupuncture sort of paradigm is super useful. In terms of private projects, that's different. It's difficult to push private projects. We tried to do that some decades ago. It didn't work that well. I think there's three things driving an answer to the question. One of them is just the history of the city. So the city started as when you think about it, the changes that we have been going through are only 34-year-old in sort of, I was born before the system transitioned. And so we started with a context which was everyone owns an apartment, small, you know, rough, but everyone was a house owner in 1990. And then that beginning stage has a lot of impact in how the city has grown, I think. The second thing is scale. So we think of Tirana as a very big city here, but you can walk from one corner of the city to the other in 1 hour and 15 minutes walk. So I think that has a lot to do with it. That sort of scale makes it much more interactive, much more walkable, and it makes it a bit more difficult to have the sort of the strong. And they're starting, you know, of course, in the last 34 years, there's a lot of what Gustavo was showing happening in Tirana as well. Gated communities, rich areas of the city becoming inaccessible to people. But that's also, I think, mitigated somehow by culture. So if you look at how development happens in the city, it's very peculiar. Landowners don't sell their land. They enter into an agreement with the developer and they get a part of the development back. And that means that this issue that you often encounter, which is gentrification happening all around, here it's less, I think, present because of that. Because typically a landowner, we won't sell his house and go somewhere else. He'll just enter into an agreement with the developer and he'll get 4 apartments or 5 apartments and he'll sort of sell a couple of them, but he'll still be an active sort of present part of the community.
And we can't forget the nature of Tirana as a capital city, right? Our inner city spaces, central city spaces, yes, they have a strong social character, but with Tirana being capital, there is also a representative aspect of the city center, which is a little more difficult to spread out in the suburbs, yeah, as could happen perhaps in cities that are not capitals. And then moving to Julian, your lessons probably apply more to our coastal areas than to Tirana. So what advice do you have for the country?
I don't know if I have an advice, but obviously with the very little knowledge that I have of the country, I still see that perhaps the situation here is a bit of a mirror to the situation that we had in Spain a few years ago, with a lot of potential, beautiful landscapes and coastal towns and weather. So it is a candy for tourism, and it is not fully developed yet. So there are similarities between the cases and back then and the situation in the country right now. And I think it would be wise to look at the examples, especially of the things that has put the coastal cities in Spain into a horrible state. Like they are not the Benidorm case, but other cases where the access to the beach is not that great. The coast is not great anymore. It's not the beautiful coastline that used to be when it was not polluted. And so those examples of unorganized growth should be taken into consideration, and doing just the opposite. Every urban growth has to be planned, carefully planned, and for the future, considering that, yes, we want, you probably want to have your part of your economy based on tourism, but not to do a monoculture of tourism. So diversify your economy is important, so don't go fully for tourism, because it's going to destroy communities, it's going to destroy the environment. And I would say that particularly you have to look for the future that is on your face right now. The climate change is changing literally everything around, and the paradigm that we have of going to the beach, enjoying the sun, has to change, because it's not going to be like that anymore.
That's very good advice. Thank you. And I mean, in Albania, we already have experience with industry monocultures, right? For a very long time, throughout the 90s, part of the 2000s, the dominant industry has been construction, which has been good for architects and planners. You know, it's brought a lot of jobs for us. But yeah, we don't want to switch to another monoculture tourism. It's good to have a diversified economy. And now, before I read some of the questions that have arrived from people on social media that are following the forum, I'd like to invite members of the public here to ask any questions of our panelists.
I would like to. You mentioned that briefly already when we listened to the first presentation, that it would be very nice to hear, to have some of that data for Tirana. The question is, but is there anything going on? Are we collecting this kind of data? Is there some research going in that direction?
So I suppose that's a question for Yoni as our data guy here.
The issue with data is, I think it's not just a problem of Tirana, it's a problem, I think, of the whole world. Big cities, they have the resources to collect organized data in a very granular, geo-referenced fashion and use them for the decision making. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of manpower, and a lot of knowledge to do that. And my experience from the time I was working for the city of Tirana was that the city tried to do that as best as it could. It always needed to have, like, when it worked best, it had like a very direct input in the daily work of the city. So in the Department of Planning and Urban Development, having the data available to you made your daily work easier, and therefore you had a very strong incentive to actually keep collecting the data and sort of be active there. We had like a department which did just that, worked very well for a while, and then more departments expressed interest to also have something similar. But once it went out of the purview of the people who were very specifically interested in it, it became like a more sort of a citywide GIS system. It became more difficult to manage. Some people wouldn't update it in time. Funny enough, the city had an amazing GIS platform full of data in the year 2010, and it wasn't updated for a couple of years, and then it was useless, because that's the thing with data. If you don't keep up with it, it becomes useless very, very fast. One approach that I'm also involved in now is with the very interesting set of sensors going up into space every month. In the next 18 months, there's going to be more satellites launched into space than in the history of mankind. So the amount of sensors and satellites going up is really exponentially growing. The kind of data we're also getting is very different. It's much more high resolution. There's different sensors, not just imaging. There's radar, infrared. There's very interesting information coming up. And I think moving forward, a lot of the information related to what's visible will be outsourced to AI and to sort of remote sensing. And then what Gustavo was showing, that's very different. I think it's something that is much more difficult to track. And it's the only solution I see there is a crowdsourced solution where NGOs, organizations, city, of course, people become active in actually gathering data for their own selves, and then, of course, that is sort of aggregated up into the level of a city. I see it's very difficult for second-tier cities to have sort of a state-of-the-art data collection and mechanism. And of course, if you add political cycles, if you add changes that happen in government, in the administration, it becomes very difficult to sort of keep a standard throughout the years. And that's the thing with data. If you don't have like the same kind of granular data collected, you can of course always collect up. You can always sort of generalize by going one zoom out, but you can never sort of zoom down. Again, I will leave it to our colleagues from the EI panel to see if there's any solution to that, but that's my perspective on it.
No, certainly we'll discuss the data issue further when we talk about AI and urban planning. So now I have a question from one of our followers online. I suppose this is a question for Julian. This is about balancing new development and the character of place, be that the natural character, as in the case of a beach, a natural beach, or the built character. There's probably people, some buildings already in the case studies that you mentioned. So has there been a balance, and how could there be more balance?
Well, obviously, you need a balance. You cannot go to any of the extremes. You cannot be fully conservationist and keep the landscape and the coastline as it is with no development whatsoever, and you cannot just be fully invasive and destroy and create a built environment that is completely artificial. We live, most of the surface of the world has been man-made. It is built environment, even forests and even the landscapes. So we are not going to close the eyes to that. So we create an environment, and it is our decision to make what sort of coastline we want. If it is more conservationist, and leave it as it is, and therefore your developments have to set back more to inland and leave the space more natural, or you can recreate that coastline because it doesn't fit your purpose. I'm not judging for example, the Dubai, which is an extreme creation of artificial islands. That is a creation of a man-made coastline. That is something. we have done it in the past, in history. Venice is an example of dominating the coastline. The Netherlands is another example of just doing your coastline. One doesn't fit your needs. So perhaps we should do some thinking of what do we want? Do we want this magnificent landscape that we have here, and tourism will come and see it and enjoy it? Then you shouldn't touch it, because if you transform it, tourists will stop coming. Or do we want to create something that we consider is interesting? We modify the environment, we modify natural species to create something that is natural but in a man-made way.
Yeah, those are all good options. Yeah, deciding, well, how much do we value what we have? Is what we have good enough, or do we want to transform it? Well, is there one final burning question from the audience before we go to lunch?
I had a question that links a little bit with what you mentioned earlier about not focusing the development of a city only on one direction, like economy, be that tourism or something else. So it's always a big question. So what is the unique selling point of a society, of a city, and everything else? And then this also links with the data and how long it takes to collect data and to plan. So we all know that dynamic cities like Tirana, I mean, relatively, they develop so quickly, so fast. Do you know of any tool which could be the right tool for policymakers to actually be quicker into envisioning what the next brings, what tomorrow brings, basically? A tool that could bring all the key stakeholders together and make decisions pretty quick without making major mistakes, and whether that could be applicable in any context, also starting from Tirana or not. Thank you.
Nowadays, we have a lot of contribution from research. So some of the examples that I showed today, and maybe something I wanted to bring at the end as maybe to draw attention, is to think about tools that actually, like the ones that I showed, could help decision makers look at the situation today and think about what they can do tomorrow about it. But then I want to go back to the other question that was said about the data. So it's difficult to have fine scale and up-to-date data. And also, on top of this, there's the problem of interpreting. We need also to think about the people who are working with policymaking and urban management. How are these people interpreting with what kind of vision? Because architecture and urban planning is a very interdisciplinary subject, and we are working with sociologists, economists, the architects ourselves, and many other people. And not everyone was educated in the same way. So we need to find this balance of how to use all these tools and all this data to have an interpretation that actually will lead us to what we need for tomorrow. But what I was trying to advocate today was really towards what you asked. So how can we do it not with some policies that we think about every 5 years or 10 years or even more, but rather think about how we can do it thinking about the city today and what we can do tomorrow. This is a very difficult question to answer.
There is no magic wand, of course, but I think probably the solution is in getting everyone in a room and reaching some kind of agreement, right? All the different stakeholders. All right, well, I think there is so much more that we could discuss, but some of us need a caffeine refill. So I'd like to invite everyone to have a time for coffee break.